Okay, so welcome to our institute seminar. Today we have two distinguished guests, Anna Wanka from Goethe University in Frankfurt and Anna Urbaniak from Jagiellonian University in Krakow. And besides the similar first name, these two persons also share that they participate in the COST PAAR network project. And they co-chair part of the project that deals with participatory approaches, and particularly in relation to older adults. And that's the topic of the presentation for today. So Anna, the floor is yours.
And I think we should go to the first slide because it's on the second. I'm sharing, but I cannot. I can. Okay, good.
Perfect. I think one step back, if that's possible.
Okay, like this.
Yes, great. Thank you so much. Thanks so much for the invitation, and thank you for having us and for everyone who is here. Before we jump right into the topic, let us take maybe 1 minute to introduce ourselves. Anna Urbaniak and myself, we are both sociologists of aging. And we got to collaborate through a joint European project on life course transitions and exclusion across the life course, and especially in later life, where we were looking at different dimensions of social exclusion, like spatial exclusions, exclusion from social relationships, or economic exclusion. And we realized in this project that even though we did work in both quantitative and qualitative, with both qualitative and quantitative methodologies, we found it difficult to get to the core of the phenomenon of exclusion, because people found it difficult to talk about it. We found it difficult to operationalize. There's a lot of shame and taboo around it. And so when we got the chance to develop a small, I would say now, spin-off project of that bigger research endeavor that would work in a participatory manner, we jumped on the chance and we started exploring the topic of social exclusion with older adults instead of on them as people that are affected. Instead, we involved them as co-researchers. And this is basically where our journey to participatory approaches began, which has led us now to leading a COST action that Anna will tell a little bit about.
Thanks, Anna. And again, thank you so much for having us. This is such a pleasure to reconnect again and share some insights from our work. As Anna said, we felt that it's a great chance to start looking at social exclusion of older adults in a participatory way. And we got so passionate about the idea that we started asking our colleagues if they also feel that this is a good way. And before we ended up in leading this COST action, we were able to produce this amazing open access handbook that I couldn't advertise more. I strongly encourage you to download it, because we have contributions from all over the world, with people providing insights on how they did participatory work with older adults. So we were mentioning that because it was a journey for us, and we really see it as a journey for everyone who joins the field of participatory work, that there are those motivations and there are a lot of passion. However, quite often we lack tools and understandings on how to do it. So in PAAR-Net, we basically look at that. So this is the COST action project that aims to bring researchers from all over the Europe and near neighborhood countries and international partner countries together to exchange knowledge and produce new knowledge in a specific domain. Our domain are participatory approaches with older adults. So you will find here 2 QR codes. We encourage you to scan them. One will lead you to the book that it's completely free and really great source of the data. And the other one will lead you to our action. And we strongly encourage you to consider joining us if you want to meet a lot of amazing researchers, practitioners, and older adults themselves who are interested in creating research, policy designs, and practice intervention in more participatory manner. Today in the seminar, we agreed that we will be rather brief in the introduction and keep the floor open for the discussion. And as we know, the audience might be very diverse. So we, in the presentation, cover the basics of participatory approaches and then hope that when you will share your insights from your research projects, we can also have a fruitful discussion around our experience. So without further ado, let us start with the next slide that you could actually see already before. That is the main question for us: what actually participatory approaches are? And if you go to the next slide and already click 3 times, you will see, so first of all, you can see a lot of, and one more, one more click, you will see a lot of different words that are quite often used in research, such as citizen science, user involvement, co-creation, photo voice, user-led research, community-based research, participatory action research, or collaborative research. They all basically fit into that, what we labeled under this umbrella term of participatory approaches. And of course, each of those keywords represents different tradition behind it and slightly different way of doing research in participatory manner. However, that what is really important for us in PAAR-Net and in our everyday way of thinking about participatory approaches with older adults, that all of them, regardless of which keyword you decide to use to describe your research practice, have certain common cornerstones in your approach. So you have a specific mindset. And Wanka will let us know what this mindset is characterized by if we go to the next slide.
Exactly. So this is already, I think, preaching to the choir, but as Anna said, to cover the fundamentals, what are participatory approaches? It's, from our perspective, not just a set of methods, but a whole research methodology with its own theoretical, so that means social constructivist, and methodological foundation. So you cannot, we would argue, come from a completely positivist rational choice background, for example, and then say, oh, and we do this little work package on participatory approaches in our project. I mean, you can do that, but that wouldn't really be in line with the foundations of participatory research. Such research approaches, on the one hand, aim to incorporate the voices of the people that we usually do research about. So we respect and understand their systems of knowledge as equally important to other systems of knowledge, like the academic one, for example. But now you would say, okay, this is probably what we also do in most of qualitative research, that we talk to the people and we respect their experiences and voices. And participatory research takes this as a foundation and goes one step further by saying we do not do research about or for certain groups of people, in our case, older adults, but with or by them. So they become a part of the research team on equal footing. On the next slide. Thanks for also zooming in. We can see some of those fundamental premises, always with little citations if you want to read up on that more. So we would argue in the book that Anna has also shown you before, that at the core of participatory research, there is a specific relationship between the research participants, or what we then call co-creators or co-researchers, on the one hand, and the academic researchers on the other hand. And this relationship is fundamentally different to other qualitative or quantitative research projects. And what is particularly challenging in this shift from respecting voices and experiences to inviting people to become co-researchers is that it also involves a power shift. From the academics and the academic institutions that are usually the ones that are in power of, for example, deciding what should be the research topic, what should be the methodology, how do we spend the money in the project. So we need to give some power up to give some power to our co-researchers. And this is actually quite a challenging task. And a lot of the academic system is not yet ready or designed to accommodate or facilitate this power shift in a productive manner. And with that, I hand it back to you, Anna, I think.
Thank you. So if we go to the next slide, you will find the main aspects that we consider as crucial for defining what participatory research or participatory practice is. So as Anna already mentioned, and this is probably something that we keep on repeating, it's about doing research with certain population about issues that are relevant and important for them, rather than doing research on those topics. And this involves stakeholders that could be either the population. So in our network, we focus mostly on older adults. So we try to work with older adults across different groups. In practical terms, of course, it turns out to be very challenging, especially because cost framework, as Anna already said, some institutions are not fully ready for that. Cost is very bureaucratic and very organized. So, for example, there is this expectation that each member will have the institutional affiliation to any legal entity. And quite often for older adults, this already is a challenge, as there might be retired and not a member of any volunteering legal entities. But having that, putting that only as a comment to our situation, the main idea for participatory work, as we would like to understand it, is the fact that we involve the one who are affected by certain issue in the research about this issue and in creating solutions that aim to address those issues. So this means that in participatory work, we are focused on working together. And as Anna already said, this means sharing the power. This means sharing responsibilities. And this means that we take the ups and downs of those practices, because it's very different if you do research only with your research colleagues, even if they are from different disciplines, from doing the research with non-academics. And this we see as the main opportunity of participatory approaches. In practical terms, we also experience this as one of the main challenges on this practical end of things. So as we now, I feel we covered mostly the main aspects and the definition of what participatory approaches are. We can move to the next step, which is the origins and evolution of those approaches.
Mm-hmm. As you can already imagine, we did not invent participatory approaches, but they do have a long history in the social sciences and beyond. Particularly when we look at different disciplines, they are rooted in anthropology, where the questions like the crisis of representation, for example, have been discussed for a much longer time than, for example, in our discipline, sociology. We have patient involvement forms in health studies and medicine. We have participatory education, community development. There's a lot of spatial research, urban planning that works with participatory approaches. Social work, of course, starting from the Chicago School in the US. And more recently, this has also turned to aging research. Probably what is missing here is also childhood and youth research, where these approaches are rooted in quite strongly. And there are, as Anna already mentioned in the beginning, there's different terminologies that also have their different historic roots. So action research in the era of starting in the era of industrialization. Or critical pedagogy in the second half of the 20th century would be particular formulations of those approaches, as well as feminist methodologies and critiques that we will go into a bit more detail in a second. So on the next slide, you will find a summary of some of those core principles of participatory approaches that we just mentioned. So this is the co-production of knowledge, of academic knowledge in our case. It's power sharing and power shifting, and therefore empowerment of co-researchers, which involves a lot of, or requires a lot of reflexivity on both sides of the academic and the non-academic researchers, of context sensitivity, and of ethical engagement at the latter points we will discuss in a minute. So when we move to the next question that we want to target here, this is the question of why do we want to use participatory approaches? What's in it for us as academic researchers? Because maybe you're thinking now, oh, sounds quite demanding, which it is. I hand the floor back to you, Anna.
Thanks so much. So if we go to the next slide, you will see that, first of all, as Anna said, of course, we didn't invite participatory approaches. They've been along for a long time, but I guess those of you who joined us today are aware that this participatory work is being especially strongly announced in the recent funding calls. You will see that there is this growing interest in including, but as Anna said, participatory components. We rather see it as sometimes that participatory approaches are more as a fig leaf or as the mouth service instead of real participatory work. So if we zoom out from this slide and you click 2 times, I'm sorry, I was used to lead it myself, so it's difficult when I ask someone else to do it. So sorry, if we go back and you can see this whole picture, you will see that actually this idea of participatory culture also isn't nothing new. If any of you has ever done online transfer of money for your child or received money via a mobile app, or if you have created your own furniture from IKEA, you are well aware that there is this not only academic interest in doing things in participatory way, but also there is this strong push from side of economic rationale that increase efficiency and lowers the cost. About the political rationale, as we already mentioned, there is this growing call for democratization and opening of science. So this is closely linked to the fact that participation empowers and facilitates social innovations that are actually embedded in people's life worlds because they feel they co-created them. They are co-responsible for them. And then, of course, that's what is the main point for us. So the scientific rationale, from the perspective of a researcher, we would, when we ask why use participatory research, we would most likely find 2 main motivations that authors claimed are important for them. First would be this instrumental motivation, so to collect better data, so data that are closer to life worlds of research subjects, this probably should be in parentheses, that involve diverse groups. So, for example, older adults living with dementia, younger children, and also, especially in the citizen science, there is this somehow instrumental and economical rationale mixed together where non-academics are trained to collect large sets of data. And then there are also value-based motivation. So this mostly grows from the idea that hierarchy in the educational system and hierarchies in the academia don't lead to great success, and we need to break them, and we need to give the voice to those who've been silenced for a long time and those whose voices were unheard. And I believe that this is something that really brings us all in PAAR-Net together. And if we go to the next slide, you will also find that what we summarized based on the work that we see in PAAR-Net and literature of the subject, that can be summarized as follows. The nature of the social world we live in today, it's too complex to afford not to use participatory work. So we see so much inequalities, and we have most likely, when in our domain, so exclusion of older adults, we have lot of research that contributes with the same findings, so that older adults are being excluded. And with participatory research, you can actually bend academia a little bit and move to the next step. So not only getting the diagnosis of the situation, but empowering in our case, older adults, to give them the right to not only provide their views, but also empower them with the skills and the knowledge needed to work on the situation. So from the perspective of the drivers in research and practice, the complexity of social challenges we face and the inequalities that's been defined and observed for a long time, both contribute toward this strong need for more inclusive decision-making and this shift towards engagement and impact that is being more and more clearly announced and pronounced in policy statements and in funding bodies. And Anna will probably provide us a little bit more with the history of how this evolved, this idea that we can shift this power dynamic and we can move from diagnosis to co-production of knowledge. So I give the floor to you, Anna.
So when we talk about participatory approaches and how difficult they can also sometimes be to implement in current academic research, this is also partly due to what Anna has just mentioned with institutional logics and shifts that are necessary, because we're touching here upon core questions and really at what is at stake in the production of academic knowledge, and that is the democratization of knowledge production. When we look historically, but also in contemporary societies, the question who can know, who is allowed to produce knowledge, who do we trust to be knowledgeable, is a very, very political one, and is a very powerful one that is always debated and that is always newly negotiated. When you, for example, ask children to draw an academic, they will usually still draw the middle-aged man with the white coat that does some kind of natural sciences research, or is a doctor, a medical doctor. And this has for a long time been the historic reality of the knowledge producer of the academic, the white male middle-aged person. Other groups have long been excluded from knowledge production in academic research. For example, this accounted for people of color, this accounted for women for a very long time, and it still accounts today for some groups. And these are particularly bound to certain ages. So still we would, or most research fields would not trust children, for example, to produce knowledge, but they also wouldn't trust older adults to produce knowledge or to be co-researchers. And I was just recently in a workshop on participatory methods in the medical sciences, and they couldn't believe that we do participatory work with people living with dementia. They were like, this is impossible, like they cannot even talk. And it was really interesting to see how, you know, their minds were blown when I told them about colleagues of ours in the Coast Action, for example, who publish papers together with co-researchers that live with dementia or cognitive impairments. So these boundaries of who can be knowledgeable, who is able and allowed to produce knowledge, they are socially constructed, and we can transform them and we can shift them. When we move to the next slide, the participatory approaches that we base our ontology and our epistemology on mainly are rooted in a feminist critique of traditional scientific knowledge production and so-called objectivity. And I want to mention here two central points of criticism from this field. You can read up more when you look at the books that we we have put on this slide. The first is the critique of what Donna Haraway has framed as the so-called God trick. That means that the researcher is supposed to be kind of like God looking down from below, looking down from up above to the research phenomena they are researching, but the researcher is not entangled in this phenomenon at all. The researcher is objective, looking at it. The critique here voiced by Donna Haraway and other colleagues is that no researcher is ever neutral, is ever objective. We are all in some ways entangled in the social world, especially when we are social scientists, but also the same accounts for the natural sciences. So our positionality as a researcher will always frame and shape the data that we can collect, the knowledge that we can produce. And this is an inevitable thing. So we can either make this productive and approach this reflexively, or we can close our eyes to this fact and still claim objectivity. And participatory approaches definitely vote for the former of these two ways. The second point of criticism, or the point that they want to make more visible, is the distribution of power in knowledge production. That also, and everyone who works in academia knows this, that academic power structures exist also within academia, and they marginalize or silence certain groups and alleviate others. You can look at publications here, for example, on who cites whom. There's these kind of like citation cartels, it's called. But also whose voices, for example, from the Global South, are often not referenced. And we're increasingly discussing this under the term of epistemic justice or injustice. Beyond that, we also have certain forms of knowledges that are brought into a hierarchy through the academic system of knowledge production. So, for example, very often quantitative knowledge is deemed as more reliable and stronger than qualitative knowledge. And the higher knowledge in the hierarchy, the more it is deemed as objective instead of subjective. And the knowledge of co-researchers is often devalued because it is anecdotal, it's situative, it's qualitative, and therefore does not meet the criteria for going up the hierarchy ladder of our knowledge estimations. But if we acknowledge that all kinds of knowledges are situated, then this helps us to find a way out of this hierarchization of different knowledges and see them more in a relational assemblage to each other. On the next slide, Anna, I think you will summarize again why we argue for participatory approaches.
Exactly. So linking it with what Anna just said, I really love that we can say what Anna just said has what Anna mentioned. So what Anna just said and explained about epistemic injustice, this is probably one of the main arguments we use most often, is that we argue that participatory approaches actually can be the tool to break it. So they, when done not only as tiny add-on that it's not taken seriously, but when taken seriously, they have the power to democratize knowledge production, and they have the power to fight the epistemic injustice. So make the other, by other I mean unheard or silenced voices or muted voices, heard. And therefore they can increase the breadth of the knowledge we produce. And finally, that what we mentioned a few times and still will be repeating, is that they actually create this a little bit of discomfort for academics. So they can challenge our academic habitus. They can make it visible for us that the hierarchies we are all experiencing in academia are not given once and for all, that they can be changed. And this hierarchy between academic researcher and research subject that now becomes the co-creator is really something that, okay, academia not always is ready to do, but once introduced, it really brings a lot of benefits, not only for non-academic co-creators that are quite broadly described in the literature, but actually brings a lot of positive outcomes for academic researchers as well. So when we go to the next slide, we can summarize the main benefits of participatory approaches that's been listed in literature and that we've also observed in our experiences. So as we said already, this is also linked with the motivations. Participatory approaches do provide richer and more nuanced data. So they actually do make your research better. What is also important is that because they are co-created, there is a stronger uptake and implementation of the solution and findings that has been developed. And what is even more important is that in the participatory work, the outcomes are more practical and sustainable. And I think Anna can also agree that one of the main amazing parts of being in PAAR-Net is the fact that when we discuss with our older co-creators group, what are the outcomes of given activities that we do, they are really very practice-oriented. And that's what academic researchers quite often lose from their side when thinking about next publication and the next evaluation round, is this practical orientation and producing something that actually has value outside of academic market. And this also translates to the community ownership. So it's no longer a research paper that is being published in well-reputed journal or book chapter, but it's actually something that stays with the community, be it skills that they develop during the projects or be it the solutions that were developed in terms of either political interventions or in terms of practical products that also a lot of our members have experience with. And finally, that what we claim is the main benefit is that it has this equity in justice at the heart of the process. So when you do your work, you actually feel that what you are doing makes sense from the perspective of keeping the power relation in more flat way, so becoming really a partners, not the knowers and subjects. And that's what you do is really relevant for the community you work with. And if we go to the next slide, we are already entering the summary part that Anna will bring together all key principles, methods, and if we manage examples, but I'm not sure if we'll manage with examples in this limited time.
Yeah, maybe just to rush through them. So some of the key principles of participatory research that also make them a little bit more demanding in practice is that you have to build a relationship to your co-researchers. It's really, I think, what helps me a lot is to use the metaphor of an interdisciplinary team that you do a project with. And in the beginning, you might not understand each other quite well, or you use the same terminology. And after a couple of months, you realize, oh, you mean completely different things when you talk about inequalities, for example. So co-researchers could be treated and understood as just another discipline that joins your project team. And with the people that you work together, you need to build relationships. And these relationships, they go beyond having just a shared academic understanding of things, but they also they don't necessarily have to involve friendship, but they have to involve respect and trust. And you have to invest time and emotional labor into building those relationships also with your co-researchers. And this can be a little bit more difficult with co-researchers depending on the social groups that you're working with, but some people might be more reluctant or also more suspicious when a person comes from the university and wants to work with them because maybe they've made bad experiences or they themselves do not have any biographical relationships to academics and might think that they don't want to do anything meaningful, they just want to read, or whatever there are kind of stereotypes about academics. The second key principle of participatory research centers around inclusion and diversity. So as we've already mentioned, participatory approaches, I think, provide an amazing means to involve more diverse groups in research than you would with the traditional methods that we have. And older co-creators will also be amazing multiplicators for their communities, so multipliers for their communities, facilitating access to other groups, facilitating and spreading the knowledge that you produce together. So participatory approaches are, on the one hand, meant to be a really inclusive approach. And as they take a lot of time, though, we need to make sure that the implementation, how we use them, is also facilitating this goal. A third of the core principles is reciprocity. So very often when we do research, we take data from our research subjects, and we might give back when we give them incentives, or when we try to change practice and policy in their favor. But what reciprocity means here is much more fine-grained, is much more targeted also at the micro situation. So we work together with mutual respect. We give each other knowledge. We take knowledge from each other, and it's a mutual relationship, a relationship where co-researchers learn. But we, as academic researchers, we also learn from them, and to have this openness for this reciprocity is important. A fourth point centers on flexibility. So I think this is one of the most challenging aspects beyond the amount of work that you have to and the amount of time that you have to spend on building strong and respectful relationships, is the topic of flexibility, because participatory projects are difficult to plan, to micromanage, and to control. And I think that as academic researchers and as funding bodies, we like control. We want to know when which work package will be ended and which deliverable will be produced, which person months will be used up. And when we work with participatory approaches, then all of this is more flexible, is more contingent, is up for debate, and can change quite a lot. This is especially challenging when we take participatory approaches so seriously that we also involve co-researchers in the writing of research proposals, because then it will be even more difficult to narrow down a timetable, a concrete work plan, as most of the funding bodies ask for. And finally, an important point is transparency as well. What I started doing here at my university now is to give seminars for training co-researchers, where we also spend a lot of time on mutual expectations. So, for example, if you have a project and there's a PhD student that has to finish their PhD in the project, this person has to write different papers and has to talk to the scientific community, whereas the co-researcher might want to change something in their immediate living environment. And so they have different expectations on what this project should be about, and to be transparent about them and communicate about them and share and create mutual understanding for each other's situations and motivations to be part of a research project, that we found is very important to prevent frustration in the process, which can also happen. There are also different ways of actually implementing participatory approaches in your projects, which Anna will talk about a little bit.
Thanks so much. So if we go to the next slide, you will see that we can distinguish the participatory work not only by the tradition they stem from and not only by the main methods they work on, but also by the degree of participation. and by the research phases that people decide to invite co-creators to. So if we go to the next slide, you will see two, I would say, very useful tools. Yes, perfect. Thank you for zooming that in. So in this text by Lisa Von and her colleague, so yeah, I always mispronounce the name, you will find a very useful graph that shows you the different stages of the research process, like starting from the design, data collection, data analysis, dissemination, acting, and then finding partners for new project, and then repeating the cycle from design, collect, analyze, and you will find different levels of involvement. So this actually is connected to that what you see on the right-hand side. So I'm sorry, it's not so easy when I'm not in the chart of that. So this is the ladder of involvement described by Sherry Arnstein already in 1969. So she already distinguished the different levels through which population can be involved in given activities. So starting from non-participation through tokenist approaches, which we also unfortunately still see quite often, to citizen control. However, her view was only linear. If now we zoom in to the Von and Jacques circle, you can see that we can bring this to thinking about our research in a very practical terms. So it might be from that what we would suggest to you to think about is to think what is meaningful for you and the people you want to do co-research with. Because for some, it might be meaningful to, at the stage of the designing the research, to, I don't want to say only inform, but inform or consult, whereas for other project, it might be already that you really want to start this early on and co-design the whole research cycle with your co-creators. So this really depends on what is your budget, what is the time you have planned for the project, and what are the manpower resources, because it might be very often the case that the co-creators you want to work with might have no interest in a certain stage. They might want to be deeply involved, let's say, in data collection and not so much in data analysis. So this all needs to be differentiated and fit to the specificity of the project you work in. So considering the research topic and considering the co-creator group. So we wouldn't argue that the only participatory work is the one that includes co-creators across all stages in this highest possible level, simply because it's not always possible. What we would argue is that as long as you can go as high with the involvement of co-creators, as long as this is meaningful for them and for you, this is something you should aim for. So it might be the case that your institution doesn't really see an opportunity to support you in the terms of space, time, to do co-writing of research proposal together. So it might be the case that you consult the drafted proposal with a group of other co-creators, for example, or other group of co-creators, and you involve them in collaboration. And this mutual exchange in data collection and data analysis, and then in dissemination of the results, again, some institution may be open and happy with you having the outputs different than research papers, that you might have an exhibition or that you might have the podcast series or whatever that is targeting the wider audience than only academic. Whereas in other institutions, if your project doesn't bring a research paper in a specific group of journals, this will be considered as something that, well, you might do it if you want, but it doesn't count for the evaluation process. So this all impacts the whole research cycle and the whole logics behind involving the co-creators in the process. So we would argue that as long as this is meaningful and possible for you and your setting and co-creators you want to work with, see what is the highest possible level at a given stage and try to aim for that. And of course, the more we push for a higher level of involvement, the higher are the chances that we will have more and more projects that will really truly incorporate the participatory work across all research stages. So if we have this differentiation in our minds, I think we can go to the next slide. And Anna can, I guess, at this stage, when we're already over the time, just very briefly mention the methods and techniques.
Yeah. So there are different, now we've talked a lot about methodologies, like the broader picture and the research approach, but there are different also, of course, techniques and methods that you can use specifically. We wanted to go into some empirical examples, but I think we will skip that now and we can do this in the discussion. But there are certain methods often used for participatory action research, where it's a lot about, world cafes and bringing together people and stakeholders to discuss certain problems and to probably involve them in innovation labs to work on solutions. So participatory action research is always very applied, empowering approaches. There are co-design and co-production workshops that are very well adaptable to such participatory action research designs. So again, bringing people together, involving them also in the design process, for example, when you talk about new technologies or products. Participatory approaches often draw on visual methods. So we work a lot with photo voice because it's a method that can be used independent of whether a person has the language skills of your country, might have some cognitive or physical impairments that make speech more difficult. We also use methods of digital storytelling as a very powerful tool to share and to go beyond the verbal. I think this is very important in participatory methods, to find methods that are accessible beyond what we are usually focused on as social scientists, the voice, the verbality of social phenomena. We use, especially when we talk about space and environments, we use methods of community mapping. I also have colleagues who work with methods of body mapping when you're working about emotions, affects, body images. Also mental health topics can be approached. So this is basically drawing a map of either your city or your neighborhood, or on the other hand, your body, and then marking different areas of that as places where you feel comfortable or uncomfortable, for example. Focus group discussions and world cafes I've already mentioned, together with collaborative analysis. There's some really interesting papers on how to do data analysis together in interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary teams together with older co-researchers, which we can also happily share after the talk. And methods of deliberative dialogue, because we always have to be aware that the power hierarchies might still exist in the structures, in the academic structures, but also in the heads of people. So sometimes people might not be so comfortable to speak up, and there are other methods to facilitate that everyone can still be heard without having to raise their actual voices. So this is just a snapshot of the different methods and techniques that you can use. And when we jump to the slide, it shows how to choose the right approach, and we might want to end with this. So this is, I think, two slides further. And we can happily share these slides so you can learn a bit more about our project. Another 2 slides, yeah, and then this one, exactly. Some of the reflection questions for reflection before you choose the approach that fits your question and your projects might be what you expect from using participatory approaches. So do you want to use them because your funding body requires them, or do you want to use them to get better data, or do you want to use them to democratize knowledge, for example? How many resources do you have available in terms of money, time, emotional resources to get into to start this journey? Who are your co-researchers? Why do they want to be part of the research project? Which methods are you familiar with? Which methods are you comfortable with and competent in? And what would be suitable for your co-researchers? This is also a dialogue that you can do together with the group of co-researchers if you already know who you want to be working with. And as Anna has shown you the different stages in the research cycle where you can implement participatory elements, so to speak, what are the stages that are most suitable in your projects for you and your co-researchers to become involved together? And it doesn't have to be from the beginning to the end, even though that would be favorable from an ontological standpoint, but it can also be certain stages where it really makes a lot of sense and is feasible to implement participatory methodologies. So maybe this is something that you can take home and apply to your own project, and we can start also discussing in the next hour.
Thank you, Anna.